Continuing my read through of the Bible, I now come to the second book of Kings. Now, there is a lot to talk about in this book. It's crammed full with a lot of events, a lot of different kings, a lot of history that we can talk about, a lot of strange things that happen. And I should probably just make a disclaimer right at the beginning of this video that, number one, I'm probably going to ramble a lot, as I usually do. Number two, I never quite know how these videos are going to go because they're unscripted, but I suspect I may just run out of time before the video ends. My phone has about a memory limit of about 1 hour. If I ramble on for more than an hour, then the phone will just automatically cut me off. That's happened with a few of my videos, reviews of books of the Bible, where I just ramble on about stuff, and that may well happen with this video. And if that does happen, so be it. I'll talk about everything that is of interest to me until I get cut off, and then wherever I get cut off will just be the end of the review. But before I get into an analysis of a chapter by chapter type thing, I want to give an overview of this because I think something that maybe I've been losing in my reviews of these various books of the Bible is just a general overview of stuff. So, the overview. This is the second book of the Book of Kings. As I've mentioned in some previous reviews, in the original Hebrew, this was all just one book, the Book of Kings. It got broken up into two books during the Septuagint, the translation into Greek, and has stayed that way in the Christian Bible ever since then. But it is useful to remember that this is originally supposed to be just all one book, and the division into two books is somewhat artificial. So we are continuing on with the story of Israel and Judah, starting with the death of King Ahab in Israel. And we are continuing on with the structure that is from 1 Kings, where we have a story about the king of Israel, then the king of Judah, then the king of Israel, then the king of Judah, going back and forth between the two kingdoms in a way that can sometimes be a little bit confusing in terms of keeping track of who is king where. Because we'll be talking about a king of Israel, and then we'll switch back to the king of Judah, and sometimes it can take a bit to reorientate yourself. You're like, oh, all right, wait, what was happening in Judah again when we last left it? But that's what we're doing. We're switching back and forth from the kingdom of Israel and Judah. Now, the basic narrative which is being set up here is every king of Israel is bad. Now, as I said in my review of 1 Kings, when we say bad here, we mean in the context of the historical polemic that the Deuteronomistic historian has set up, meaning they're not worshiping Yahweh, they're worshiping other gods. So that's the morality framework. As for the kings of Judah, some of them are good and some of them are bad. And the basic thesis of this history is that because the kings of Israel and Judah are not faithful to Yahweh, Yahweh is going to deliver them up into their enemies. And that will happen near the end of the book. Now, Israel, because every single king of Israel in this framework is not faithful to Yahweh, Israel falls first. And that happens in 2 Kings 17, where Samaria, the capital of Israel, falls, and then the northern kingdom gets destroyed, and then we're just left with the kingdom of Judah from 2 Kings 18 to the end of 2 Kings, at which point Jerusalem falls to the Babylonians and the beginning of the exile period, where the Jews in Judah are carted off to Babylon for the exile. Now, in terms of historical accuracy, we are in the historical period at this point. So, I'm going off of now what I've learned from Robin Lane Fox in his book, The Unauthorized Version, Truth and Fiction in the Bible. But the other stuff I've read or listened to largely lines up with this. So I'm thinking of Christine Hayes and her Yale lectures on the Old Testament from Open Yale University. And The Bible Tells Me So by, what was his name? I'm blanking on the author's name now, but I'll leave it in the description down below. They also seem to support what Robin Lane Fox says, which is that this history was compiled in the generation after the fall of Jerusalem. So the fall of Jerusalem is the grandfather's generation. The generation that was compiling this history, their grandfathers lived in the fall of Jerusalem. And this was fresh in the historical memory, still in living memory somewhat. And so this period is historical and very historically accurate. The further away we get from the fall of Jerusalem, the less historically accurate the biblical narrative is, till by the time we get into Joshua and Judges, it's just pure mythology. But in 2 Kings, it is largely historical, and it gets more and more historically accurate the closer we get to the fall of Jerusalem. But even before the fall of Jerusalem, some of these kings are attested to in other historical sources. So, for example, King Omri, who is in 1 Kings, but his descendants, King Ahab and Ahab's line, are in 2 Kings. Omri is attested to an Assyrian tablet, or at least the house of Omri is. Also, Jehu, who... where is Jehu? Who were usurp the king of Israel from the house of Omri. Jehu is attested to. And in the kingdom of Judah, Hezekiah is attested to. And perhaps Hezekiah, is attested to in Assyrian tablets. And the siege of Jerusalem during Hezekiah's reign. Where is it? The siege of Jerusalem by Sennacherib. And Sennacherib is a real historical figure who is assassinated by his sons in 2 Kings 19. This actually happened. The real historical Sennacherib, the king of Assyria, the emperor of Assyria, was assassinated by his kings. Was actually assassinated by his sons, just as is attested to in the Bible. I think, if memory serves, maybe the time frame of the Bible is a little bit different than the real history. So, as the footnote here indicates, he was assassinated in 681, maybe not the same year that the Bible has him being assassinated. So some of the little details are maybe not perfect, but a lot of this is actually attested to by outside historical sources. Now, that doesn't mean all the miracles and everything are true, but that means we are in a historical period now where these are real historical figures that are taking the stage. And if you're a history nut like me, this just makes it fascinating that we are now learning about real historical figures and the real history of the Middle East, and the empires that arise during this period. Now, again, not all of these kings are attested to in a historical document. For example, Josiah, I was looking him up on Wikipedia. We don't have any outside attestation of him except from the Bible. But that doesn't mean he wasn't historical. That just means no records have survived. The same with a lot of these guys. We don't have attestation of all of them from outside sources, but they could well be historical. And we have attestation. I'm going to have to stop saying that word. We have evidence of some of them from other sources. So, this is what I really find fascinating about the Bible, even though I no longer consider myself a believer. But we do have this record of history. I'm sure I'm not the only person whose first exposure to ancient history was Bible school and Sunday school, learning about the kingdom of Assyria, the kingdom of Babylon, the kingdom of Egypt, all of which figure in on this narrative, especially near the end of it. We have Egypt and Assyria fighting each other for dominance near the end of 2 Kings. And then we have the kingdom of Babylon coming into the picture. Now, the lens through which we view this is the little kingdom of Israel and the even littler kingdom of Judah, which were not these big, powerful kingdoms. So it's a bit of a historical accident that the records from all of this is from this little rinky-dink kingdom that wasn't one of the most powerful kingdoms in the world at that time. And I mean, we do have other records of Babylon and Egypt and Assyria, of course, but the main narrative that has survived into Western civilization is the biblical narrative, right? I mean, that's what we learn as children, and that's what people have been learning as children for the past couple millennia in the Christian era. That's for most normal people, that's the lens through which they learn the history of this. I include myself in that. I mean, I haven't read a lot of books on Babylonian history. I haven't read books on the Assyrian Empire. I just know about these things because of my Sunday school days and my Old Testament, reading the Old Testament as a kid. So yeah, I mean, it's on the one hand, it does kind of seem a little bit strange that just through this accident of history, this narrative has become the primary narrative with which we learn this history. Sometimes reading through this, you at least I sometimes feel like, geez, why are we wasting all this time learning about why am I wasting my time reading about the kings of Israel and Judah? Why don't I get a book out of the library about the Assyrian Empire and learn about like the real big movers and shakers of this history, of this period, of this region. But on the other hand, I think, and somebody correct me if I'm wrong, the biblical narrative is the only narrative of this period of Middle Eastern history to put this into any sort of, well, interesting narrative with an ideological framework. And I know by today's modern standards, the ideological framework of the Old Testament is problematic for any number of reasons, a number of reasons I've talked about on this channel. But, what other, I mean, other than the Old Testament narrative, we're just left with fragments of chronicles from the Assyrian or the Babylonian Empire, right? And even those frameworks tend to be a dry history of just the accomplishments of those kings. And again, somebody correct me if I'm overlooking something or there's something I'm not aware of. But the biblical narrative, for all its shortcomings, is an attempt to put this history into some sort of grand narrative arc about the story of God and his people. And even if you're no longer a believer, like I am, you can appreciate that there is some sort of effort to put this grand sweep of history into this narrative. Not only in Second Kings, but also including the whole Bible. So I'll get to maybe this a little bit later if I have time, but there are details from Second Kings that we are missing, that are filled in the rest of the Bible. So for example, the siege of Jerusalem. We don't get a lot of detail about this in Second Kings. We get more detail about this in the book of Jeremiah, where it's going to talk a little bit about how the Babylonian army has broken off from the siege of Jerusalem to go fight the Egyptian army, and then comes back again to reconstitute its siege of Jerusalem. That is not in Second Kings, but those details are in the book of Jeremiah. Or, for example, the reign of Josiah, when Josiah fights the king of Egypt at Megiddo. We get more details about this, why Josiah is fighting the king of Egypt. We get more details about that in Second Chronicles. So I guess point is that there are some details that are filled in by other parts of the Bible. But looking at maybe the biblical narrative as a whole, which of course will not only go for the Assyrian and the Babylonian Empire, but it will eventually include the Persian Empire, and because this is the Catholic Bible, also the Greek Empire, the Seleucid Empire. There's that whole sweep of history, which, if we didn't have the Bible, we just have just these boring chronicles from the Assyrian and Babylonian courts, which wouldn't try to put in any of this into any sort of grand sweeping narrative. So for all its shortcomings, I think you really do have to appreciate what's going on here. This is kind of like the only surviving big narrative we have of all these big events in the Middle East. The fact that it's told from the perspective of the small kingdoms of Israel and Judah, in a way almost kind of reminds me of like the Lord of the Rings, right? You have this huge big battles in Middle Earth, and they're told from the perspective of the hobbits, these small creatures. Maybe that's the way to view the historical chronicles in the Bible. You have the kingdoms of Assyria and the kingdom of Babylonia, or the empire, really, right? Empire of Assyria, empire of Babylonia, empire of Persia, and there we get that sweep of history. And again, I think a lot of people in the Western world only know about the Assyrian, Babylonian, and Persian Empire through their Old Testament. The perspective we get of all these sweeps of empires over the Middle East from the perspective of Israel. I'm rambling, I know. And sorry. This is another video where I'm filming this a little bit late at night because that's the only time of the day I have. So I don't know if this video would have been better if I would have filmed it maybe during the afternoon. But it is what it is. I'm going to do my best to make some sense out of this. And apologies if I end up rambling. Anyways, so that's the overarching narrative which we have here. And the basic ideology, like I said, is that Israel and Judah are going to fall because they're not faithful to Yahweh. And the basic thrust of the Deuteronomistic historian, who's believed to be writing all this or editing this, is if you're faithful to Yahweh, you will prosper. If you're not faithful to Yahweh, you will not prosper and your enemies will defeat you. Now, what's a little bit odd about reading through 2 Kings is that overarching narrative does not seem to fit the reign of all these kings. So let's see if we can look for some examples. There are plenty of examples of good kings in Judah where they do everything God wants them to, and they still get defeated at their enemies. Oh yeah, so here's a good example. The reign of Uzziah in Judah. So he did what is pleasing to Yahweh, just as his father Amaziah had done. Now, he doesn't get rid of the high places, but a lot of them don't. We'll come back to that detail maybe. But Yahweh struck the king, and he became a leper till his dying day. He was confined into his room. So we get this detail that he's doing what is pleasing to Yahweh. Now, he doesn't get rid of the high places, but a lot of these kings don't get rid of the high places. Never seems to have been a big problem before. All of a sudden, Yahweh struck him. Now, there are some kings, wicked kings in Israel, who God gives military victory to, just to prove that to demonstrate his power. So sometimes the good kings get struck down or defeated in battle, and the wicked kings or the unfaithful kings get the military victory. So this is a bit strange. I mean, another big example is King Josiah. Let me see if I can find his reign. So the historian who's writing this really likes Josiah. So no king before him had turned to Yahweh as he did, with all his heart, all his soul, all his strength, in perfect loyalty to the law of Moses. Nor was any king like him seen again. So you can't possibly do better than Josiah. But then what happened to him? So during Josiah's reign, Pharaoh Necho, king of Egypt, was on his way to the king of Assyria at the river Euphrates when King Josiah intercepted him, but Necho killed him at Megiddo in the first encounter. So that's not the way this narrative is supposed to work, right? The kings who are faithful to Yahweh are supposed to have the military victories over their enemies. King Josiah, even though he's really faithful to Yahweh, just kind of gets killed at that first encounter. And by the way, while I'm here, in case I forget or don't have time to come back to this point later, Megiddo is where we get our word for Armageddon from. And there are a number of different battles at Megiddo, which may or may not be the origins of the Armageddon. But this is, I think, possibly one contender for where the idea of Armageddon comes from King Josiah getting killed at the Battle of Megiddo. But anyways, now, Chronicles, the books of 1st and 2nd Chronicles are going to repeat the history of 1st and 2nd Kings. And they're going to try to clean up this narrative a little bit to make sense of it. So when we get to Chronicles, we're going to get an explanation of why King Josiah shouldn't have been fighting this battle against Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and so why God deserted him at this battle. But that is Chronicles trying to clean this up and trying to make sense of it. As it stands in 2 Kings, we just have Josiah just getting randomly killed out of nowhere. And that's maybe the most extreme example, but that happens with a few other of the good kings of Judah, where they're doing everything God wants them to, so it would seem, and they're still getting defeated by their enemies, and then some of the bad kings of Israel are getting Yahweh's help with military victories. So the polemic doesn't entirely line up. I think there's, if I remember from Christine Hayes' lectures, there's somewhat of the idea of getting punished for their ancestors. So the Manasseh is, I guess, like the most wicked king in Judah. He's the king of that God really hates, or that the historian really hates, both of them. But then after Manasseh, we get Josiah, who's the really good king. And Josiah tries to put in place the religious reforms to appease Yahweh. But at this point, Yahweh will not be appeased. So, where does it say it? Yahweh says, I'm still going to destroy Jerusalem, but because you have humbled yourself and tried to appease me, it will not happen during your lifetime. So that's the best you can do at this point. But the destruction of Jerusalem at this point is already locked in, just because God is so mad at what Manasseh did, even though Manasseh is dead during this time. And I think, where does it get mentioned? Later. Oh, yeah, here it is. So Josiah did everything. This is the part I just quoted. Josiah did everything God wants. Yet Yahweh did not renounce the heat of his great anger, which blazed out against Judah because of all the provocation Manasseh had offered him. Yahweh declared, I will thrust Judah away from me too, as I have already thrust Israel. So, Manasseh was several kings ago, but the destruction of Jerusalem is already locked in, and then we do get to the sack of Jerusalem and the deportation into exile. Okay, so that's the overarching overview of this. Now let's get into this maybe and go over some of the details. So I'm just going to go through and comment on whatever sticks out to me, or comment on whatever I find interesting. A few disclaimers. This is unscripted, so apologies if this turns into a bit rambling. Second of all, I'm not a scholar, so take me with a grain of salt, or double check anything I say. And third of all, I am going to do my best to remember everything I've read as I go through this. But apologies if I stumble a little bit. I did read through this all, but some of this was a couple weeks ago at this point. I might need to... We'll see how this goes. So the overarching structure of First and Second Kings is we do have this chronicle of the kings of Israel and the kings of Judah, but there's also a detour where Elijah and Elisha just kind of take over the narrative, and that's happening right in the middle here. So 2 Kings kind of picks up with the Elijah and the Elisha narrative. So Elijah is taken up into heaven, and Elisha succeeds him. This is in the 2 Kings here. And then we have the adventures of Elisha, which coming next. They are episodic in nature. So Elisha has this adventure, Elisha has that adventure. One of the things that I don't remember if I ever knew this before, if I knew this, maybe I forgot, but some of Elisha's miracles are very similar to Elijah's miracles. So the widow's oil, where there's a widow who doesn't have enough oil, and Elisha gives her a miracle where her oil doesn't run out, is very similar to a miracle that Elijah performed in 1 Kings, where there was a widow who didn't have enough food, and Elijah had a miracle where her food didn't run out. And then there's a woman whose son dies, and Elisha brings him back to life. And this is very similar to a miracle in 1 Kings with Elijah, where there's a woman whose son dies and Elijah brings him back to life. So now there's no footnotes here, but just my own supposition is this must be the same story that was just attributed twice in slightly different variants, once to Elijah and once to Elisha. What's also interesting about the adventures of Elisha is quite often the author will seem to forget who the king of Israel is. So it just says the king of Israel and doesn't specify which king of Israel. Now, I mean, we are right in the middle of the Chronicles of the Kings of Israel. So who is king of Israel at this time? It's, Jehoram, one of the sons of Ahab. But after that's established, the author seems to forget. And these stories in 2 Kings are coming from multiple different sources. So maybe in the Elisha stories that are inserted here into the Chronicles of the Kings of Israel, it's not important who the king of Israel is. It's just the king of Israel. Now, the kings of Israel during the time of Elisha are from Ahab's house, the house of Omri. And God really hates Ahab's house. So these are like the bad kings. Although, as I noted in my review of 1 Kings, they don't actually seem all that bad, and they at times can seem quite sympathetic. Now, so for example, the king of Israel, who's king during the Armenian Wars, doesn't seem like a bad guy. He's trying to help his people when Samaria is being besieged by the king of Armenian. By the way, some translations will refer to this as Syria. So I guess Iram or Syria. I have memories of my Sunday school days of this being referred to as the kingdom of Syria. So anyways, another interesting thing I noticed while I'm talking about this section is I guess the king of Syria was Israel's antagonist at this point in history. So Assyria will come later, but right now it's just Syria or Aram, I guess depending on the translation. But there seems to be a number of places where Israel and Aram will make peace, and then the war will just break out again. So Naaman, the commander of Aram or Assyria, has leprosy. he goes to Elisha and gets healed. And it looks like everything is good between Israel and Aram, or again, Syria. The commander of Aram's armies is very grateful to Elisha for having healed him. But then in the very next chapter, they're at war again. But then Elisha delivers them into the hands of Israel. Now, this is another example of what I was talking about earlier, about where God is giving victory to one of the kings of Israel, even though he's not been faithful to Yahweh. So again, this isn't how the polemic is supposed to work, but this is what happens. And then the king of Israel is instructed to show mercy to the Aramean soldiers who are put over to his hands. And then it says, Aramean raiding parties never invaded the territory of Israel again. And then the very next verse, it happened after this that Ben-Hadad, king of Aram, mustered his whole army and laid siege to Samaria. Right after we had the Aramean raiding parties never invaded the territory of Israel again. So I suspect there's some sort of biblical commentary that explains this apparent contradiction. But to me, it just looks like these were taken from two different sources. Again, this is another place where I wish the Jerusalem Bible had maybe more footnotes to help explain what's going on here to me. And again, the king of Israel is just referred to as the king of Israel here. The narrator seems to have forgotten who the king of Israel is. But again, even though this is the house of Ahab or the house of Omri, God is helping Israel. So this is another example of, that sometimes the bad kings get help and sometimes the good kings get struck down. The polemic sometimes doesn't seem to make sense. So we have the history of Jehu. Now, Jehu, as I said earlier, is a real historical king. We have documentations of him from the Assyrian tablets. And if I remember Robin Lane Fox correctly, Robin Lane Fox said Jehu had, I guess the documentation we have of him looks like he had surrendered to the king of Assyria and become a vassal, and maybe broken up a coalition of kings that had been resisting Assyria. I think Robin Lane Fox refers to him as like a traitor on the international scale, but that's perhaps an ideologically charged way of looking at it. So after having all these passages where Yahweh is helping the kings in the line of Ahab, we get to this part where now the family of Ahab has to be wiped out. So you are to strike down the family of Ahab, your master, and avenge the bloods of the servants and all the servants of Yahweh on Jezebel and the whole family of Ahab. I will wipe out every male belonging to the family of Ahab. So there's a couple of things to note here. Jehu does go on this massacre and massacres all the family of Ahab, including all the descendants, 70 sons being educated by the leading men of the city. So I guess some of them are still children, and they all get butchered. And there seems to be quite a big scale massacre of everybody related to Ahab. Now, one gets the impression when reading 2 Kings that Yahweh wants this massacre to happen. This is a massacre that is sanctioned by Yahweh. From passages like this, you are to strike down the family of Ahab, your master. Yahweh, the God of Israel, says this. I will wipe out every male belonging to the family of Ahab, etc. However, elsewhere in the Old Testament, this massacre is going to be seen as Jehu extending his mandate in the book of Hosea. And I don't know if I should try and find that passage right now. I haven't bookmarked it ahead of time. You know what? This is a bad idea. I was thinking maybe I'd flip to the book of Hosea and try and find that passage, but I haven't bookmarked it ahead of time. So you can look that up yourself if you're curious, I guess. In the prophet Hosea, then the prophet Hosea is going to claim that because of this massacre, Jehu is incurring Yahweh's wrath. So there's a bit of a mixed message here regarding this. But I guess one of the takeaways we can take away from this is it seems like such a massacre really did happen, right? Because we've got two sources for it in the Old Testament, which, and again, take me with a grain of salt. I'm no scholar, but I think we would count these as two independent sources, right? Sources that are independent of each other. The narrative in Kings and the prophet Hosea. I guess historically there was some sort of big massacre that must have happened. Jezebel gets assassinated during this time. Jehu went to Jezreel, and Jezebel heard of it. She made up her eyes with kohl and adorned her head and appeared at the window. As Jehu came through the gateway, she said, "Is all well, Zimri, you murderer of your master?" Now, Zimri is another king of Israel. He was a king of Israel before Omri. So this is a little callback, and I just thought this was neat. Another new little historical detail here. And there's a footnote here. So Zimri assassinated King Elah. This has happened in 1 Kings 16, verse 19. And the sting and the taunt is that he only reigned for 8 days. So she's calling him Zimri because he murdered his master, but also implying that his reign is going to be quite short. Zimri, I believe, if my memory is serving me correctly, was overthrown by Omri, who was the founder of who was Ahab's father. So the founder of the house that Jehu is now overthrowing. Now, the other thing about this is something that confused me all the way back to my Sunday school days, and I never did find a good explanation for this. But the mandate is all the males belonging to the house of Ahab have to be wiped out. But this mandate is going to conflict with another mandate, which is that the house of David in Judah is never going to be extinguished. Because at this point, the house of Ahab and the house of Judah have intermarried. So the king of Judah is killed. So Ahaziah is the son of Ahab's sister, Athaliah, because again, the houses of Israel, Ahab and the house of Judah have intermarried. So Jehu kills the King Uzziah, king of Judah. And Jehu also goes into Judah and massacres the brothers of King Uzziah, king of Judah. But we don't wipe out the line of Judah entirely. Athaliah, who is Ahab's sister, does take power in Judah for a while, but Jehoshaphat secretly took away Jehoash, which was her brother's son. Now, her brother is her brother is Ahaziah, right? Yeah. Daughter of Joram, the sister of Uzziah, secretly took away Jehoash, her brother's son. I suppose there's maybe some wiggle room for her, for if you wanted to argue that her brother's son is a different brother. But it certainly sounds like her brother is Ahaziah. Ahaziah is a descendant of Athaliah. Well, actually, maybe it does work, huh? Because Athaliah is not Ahab's descendant. Athaliah is Ahab's sister. So maybe that's the wiggle room. So it's yeah, but yeah. Sorry, I'm obviously sorting through this in real time as I'm filming this video. The houses of Ahab and the houses of Judah are now intermixed. So if you killed off all the males in Judah, then you'd be wiping out David's line, which God had promised not to do. But I guess maybe you could say some wiggle room there when Athaliah is the sister of Ahab and not his descendant. But then if that's the logic, then why does Jehu massacre all the brothers of King Uzziah? Because King Uzziah as well is descended from Ahab's sister. I don't know. The houses of Judah and the house of King Ahab are intermixed. So we get Jehoiada, who's one of... No, that's the high priest. We get Jehoash, who is, I guess, the grandson of Athaliah. So he would be the grand nephew of Ahab, and this is how the line continues in Judah. Okay, but anyways, I've wasted enough time on that. Like I said, the kings of Israel are all portrayed as being bad, although some are worse than others. There seems to be a distinction. So when the kingdom split back in First Kings, Jeroboam the first did not want his people going down to Jerusalem to worship at the temple. Because he thought that would undermine his authority as king. And I think he kind of has a point there, right? That would have undermined his kingdom. So that seemed to be an impossible situation that he was being put in by Yahweh. But anyways, so he set up golden calves to worship. And every single king of Israel since then does not abolish those golden calves. So the golden calves are sin one. But then in addition to that, some of the kings of Israel worship Baal. And worshiping Baal is apparently the really bad thing. So if you're just worshiping the golden calves that Jeroboam the first had set up, then that's one thing. Then you're just kind of bad. If you're going to worship Baal, then that's when you're really getting bad. And that seems to be the distinction between the really bad kings of Israel and the just sort of bad kings of Israel, but none of them get a good write-up. Yeah. So yeah, here we go. The reign of Hoshea in Israel. So he did what is displeasing to Yahweh, though not like the preceding kings of Israel, which I think means he didn't worship Baal. I don't know. So we get the fall of Samaria, and then some commentary about why this happened. And this is, again, the end of the 10 tribes of Israel. They became the 10 lost tribes of Israel. Although, as I noted in my review of 1 Kings, somebody help me if I'm missing something obvious, but who exactly the 10 tribes of Israel are is always a little bit been confusing to me. Does the tribe of Levi count as one of the 10 tribes of Israel? Is Benjamin included in that? Is Simeon included in that? The 10 lost tribes of Israel? Anyways. Yeah, something I forgot to mention actually. Even before then, some of these tribes are getting moved off of their land. Let me see if I can find it. The Transjordanian tribes are already displaced much earlier than that. That's Reuben and Gad. Now, where was that? Oh, yeah, here we go. So at that time, Yahweh began to whittle Israel down, and Hazael defeated the Israelites throughout the territory from the Jordan eastward, all the lands of Gilead, of the Gadites, the Reubenites, and the Manassesites. So I think from this time on, these tribes are dispossessed of their homeland, which goes back to a prophecy made in the book of Genesis, where I believe Reuben, not the tribe Reuben, but the patriarch Reuben, slept with his father's concubine. And there was some sort of prophecy about how they were going to be homeless because of that or something like that. And I think that's where this has come in, is they lose their homeland at a much earlier place than the other tribes. This happened during the time of Jehu. Oh, Jehu I forgot to mention. After Jehu does that whole massacre of Ahab's family to avenge, the destruction of all the temples of Baal to avenge Ahab's wickedness, then Jehu goes right back into sin. Although, like I mentioned earlier, he got rid of Baal, so he's on the good side for that. But none of the kings of Israel got rid of the golden calves that Jeroboam had set up. Again, presumably because they didn't want to give up their sovereignty, their religious sovereignty, and have their people worship at the temple in Jerusalem, which was under the kingdom of Judah. Okay. Then we're down to King Hezekiah. Now, this is what I was talking about earlier, where Assyria does besiege Jerusalem. And this was a real historical thing, and Hezekiah was a real historical person. So this is interesting. Now, Hezekiah is one of the... Yeah, there's a few confusing things about this. For one thing, Hezekiah seems to have submitted to the king of Assyria. So Hezekiah, king of Judah, sent this message to the king of Assyria: I have been at fault. Call off the attack. I will submit myself to whatever you impose on me. And he gives all this silver and gold. But then after that submission, then the king of Assyria still comes over and besieges Jerusalem. The other interesting thing about this is even though God ultimately delivers Judah from this, Judah is still portrayed as very weak here. And Hezekiah is one of the good kings. He's one of the kings who serves Yahweh faithfully. So, the narrative that was earlier in this historical narrative, like the Joshua Judges narrative, where if you serve God faithfully, he will defeat all your enemies before you, seems to have been softened a little bit. Even with God on their side, they still seem to be just barely hanging on here. Then we get the wicked king Manasseh. Now, Manasseh, it is interesting because there's an extra part to his story which is not in 2 Kings, which is in Chronicles, which is how Manasseh ends up getting deported to Assyria and ends up actually repenting and coming back to God and serving Yahweh at the end, which is not in 2 Kings. So that's an interesting difference between the narratives in Chronicles and Kings. And 2 Kings, like I said before, Manasseh is like the worst king. And ever since Manasseh, then Jerusalem's fate has been sealed. Then we get to King Josiah, who I was talking about earlier. And it was during the reign of King Josiah that the Book of the Law is discovered. Now, what exactly the Book of the Law is, I guess, has been a source of speculation for historians. Robin Lane Fox, in his book, indicates that this is the origin of Deuteronomy. And he indicates that one theory is that the priests themselves wrote up the Book of the Law, Deuteronomy, and then pretended to have discovered it. Like, we just discovered this ancient text of the Word of God that's been lost for so long. But actually they had written it up themselves, and it had reflected, the priestly prerogatives or the priestly priorities. I'm not sure how much evidence there is for that. Certainly, I don't believe Robin Lane Fox presented a lot of evidence. But I've since seen a few other sources indicate this. So I guess it's a fairly widespread view. According to Wikipedia, at one time this was a widespread view that this was the origin of Deuteronomy. But then more recently, people have begun to doubt this. So, yeah, this is possibly the origin of some of the Mosaic law, the so-called Mosaic law, or not. I guess this is something that's in dispute. And like I said earlier, we don't really have any outside reference to Josiah outside the Bible, anyways. At least that was according to Wikipedia. But Josiah is a religious reformer, and ironically, even though he does everything God wants, it does not turn away God's anger from Jerusalem. There also is an indication here which seems to be another example of human sacrifice. I've been kind of noting these as I've been going through my review of the Old Testament narrative. So Josiah did away with all the temples of the high places that the king of Israel had put in the towns of Samaria, provoking the anger of Yahweh. He treated these places exactly as he had treated the one at Bethel. All the priests of the high places who were there he slaughtered on the altars, and on these altars burned human bones. Now, the footnotes of the Jerusalem Bibles indicates that the human bones being put in the sacred places are to desecrate them. So I guess, to be fair, maybe this isn't a sacrifice to a god. It's just burning human bones at an altar to defile the altars, not to make a human sacrifice. If that makes it any better, I don't know. And then we have the destruction of Jerusalem, and the deportation, which comes in the first part. And then the second part, there's a rather brutal fate of the king of Jerusalem, Zedekiah, who had his sons slaughtered before his eyes and his eyes put out. This is what the king Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon did to him, which is something that has stuck in my mind from my Bible school days. Actually, there's a few instances of brutality in here. I've skipped over the part about pregnant women having the babies ripped out of their wombs, which is referenced a few different times in here. And then a little addendum about a governor of Judah who's appointed by the Babylonians, but he's then assassinated. And again, this is a little short story which is given more detail in the book of Jeremiah about what happens here. So, yeah. I realize that I've made a little bit of a mess of this review. And again, maybe if I had filmed this at a different time of day or something, maybe I could have done a better job of it. But it is what it is. Sorry. I've not talked about half of the interesting things in here, like like when Elisha the prophet has called in the she-bears to maul the 42 boys. That was an interesting little detail I skipped over. There's just, well, you can't talk about everything, huh? Even if I had been better organized and more articulate, you can't talk about everything in here. So I've talked about a few things. I'm sorry I didn't do a better job, but we will just call this here. And maybe I'll be more articulate for the next one.